The National Storytelling Network, the Cobb County Storytellers, and guests are proud to sponsor Tellebration.
This year's program is dedicated to the memory of Mrs. Anne Virginia Wallace. She served her community as the facilitator of the Southern Crescent Storytellers and was also a member of the National Storytelling Network. For many years, she served not only as a mentor to the members of the Cobb County Storytellers, but also as a person of inspiration. Through her propagation, dedication, and tenacity, she was able to help preserve the oral tradition of storytelling, especially among children.
Beginning virtually on November 20th from the Sewell Mill Library and Cultural Center, it is hereby proclaimed to be Tellebration.
This worldwide event of storytelling is happening at this very moment across 6 continents, 9 countries, and in 40 states. Over 300 audiences have gathered for this spectacular storytelling event.
Without further delay, let the stories begin.
Hello, I'm Jone Williams with the Cobb County Storytellers, and I am here to wish you a Happy New Year. You can see I'm all dressed up in my party clothes, ready to go. And do you know who else enjoyed celebrating the first day of the year? George Washington, the very first president of the United States. He, of course, was born and grew up and always returned to his home in Virginia. And he always eagerly participated, whether he was in Virginia or not, in their New Year's Day customs. And one of his favorite things was something called calling. And that meant that you got out, you visited your neighbors, they came to visit you, and everybody would have a big punch bowl of wassail. And they would give everybody a glass, raise that glass, and say wassail, which means to your health. They also would have given small gifts on that day, and the Virginia newspaper people, the shopkeepers, were putting ads in the newspapers encouraging people to do this. And at that point, gifts were given more often on New Year's Day than they were on Christmas. And it was not a gift exchange. The superiors, like Washington, would have given gifts to his servants or his children. It was not the general kind of exchange that would come later. And one of the things that Washington especially loved to do was dance. And he was a very good dancer. And I think we all know that he was very tall. He was 6'2", which of course is still tall in our day, but it was a giant in the 1700s. And his wife Martha was only 5 feet tall. So that must have been quite a sight when they took to the dance floor together. Even after he became president, Washington would practice all these customs to celebrate the new year. His first year as president, 1790, well, actually he was inaugurated in 1789, but his first New Year's would have been 1790, and he paid calls along with friends all over Lower Manhattan, which was where he lived. The next year, the capital moved to Philadelphia, and he took those customs with him. But there was one New Year that Washington would not have enjoyed. New Year's Day, 1777, was very bleak. We all remember that we passed the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and declared ourselves a country free and independent of Great Britain. But even though we had said that, we still had to prove it on the battlefield. And the Revolutionary War had not gone well at all for Washington and the Continental Army during 1776. Finally, on Christmas Eve, Washington decided that he would take his troops across the Delaware River into New Jersey and go to the encampment of the Hessian soldiers who were fighting the British. Well, Washington and his troops won that battle, the Battle of Trenton. And that, of course, raised morale greatly, but it did not solve the problem of winning the war. And on 1776, as the new year dawned, Washington faced an overwhelming problem. The enlistments of most of his soldiers were expiring. We did not have a draft then. They were legally free to leave the Continental Army on January 1st. And many of them, most of them, as a matter of fact, were planning to do so because they were hungry, they were tired, they were not paid regularly, and they thought they had done their duty and were going to go home where their wives and children and other family members needed them. But if we'd had no army, we would have had no country. So Washington was desperate to find a way to keep his men. And a patriot named Robert Morris came forward and said, "I'll give every man who re-enlists a $10 bonus." Well, in 1777, $10 was a fortune. But still, that did not stir many recruits. So Washington sent out the officers under him on New Year's Day, 1777, to talk to their men. Still not many of them signed up, maybe about 20. And finally, Washington assembled all of his troops, got on his horse, rode up and down the lines, and fortunately, one of his sergeants recorded part of what he said to them that day. And with this, I'm quoting George Washington. "My brave fellows, you have done all that I asked you to do, and more than could be reasonably expected. But your country is at stake. Your wives, your houses, and all that you hold dear. You have worn yourselves out with fatigues and hardships, but we know not how to spare you. If you will consent to stay 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you probably never can do under any other circumstances. The present is emphatically the crisis which is to decide our destiny." Well, that day, about 200 men came forward, and eventually Washington ended up with an army of about 3,000 men. And of course, we know that our destiny was decided in victory, and we now live in the United States of America, thanks to George Washington and the brave soldiers in the Continental Army and in the Continental Navy. So this year, as you're celebrating the New Year's Day, as you're making your resolutions, as you're eating your black-eyed peas and collard greens, as you're raising a toast, be sure that you raise one to the Father of our country and the brave men who followed him. And as you raise that toast, remember to say a prayer of thanks to our Heavenly Father, whose divine providence ensured, as our Constitution says, the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So thank you very much, and may you have a very happy New Year.